In the skies over the Third Reich, in 1943, American bombers were dying alone. Dozens, hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators Colossal Steel birds flew deep into the heart of enemy territory to strike at Germany's war factories. They were a symbol of American might, bristling with machine guns, flying in tight, mutually protective formations. But it wasn't enough. The moment they crossed the point of no return, where their own fighter escorts, with their limited fuel range, were forced to turn back, all hell broke loose. Out of the clouds, out of the blinding sun, swarms of German predators would pounce nimble Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and powerful Focke-Wulf 190s. For the German aces, it was a hunt. They tore into the bomber formations, and the sky would blossom with fiery explosions. Every downed bomber meant 10 lives. 10 American boys burned alive or sent plummeting into the icy void. The losses were monstrous, unacceptable. On some days, 1 in every 4 aircraft failed to return. The bloody arithmetic of war was unforgiving. At this rate, the US 8th Air Force would simply bleed out long before it could break the back of German industry. They needed a protector. They needed a guardian angel with wings of duralumin and a heart of fire. A fighter that could escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But no such aircraft existed. And then, in this hour of desperation, a legend arrived from across the ocean. An aircraft born almost by accident, created in record time, and destined to become the nightmare of the Luftwaffe and the savior of thousands of lives. Its name would become synonymous with victory in the air. Its name was the P-51 Mustang. Before we continue, we'd like to ask for a little support. A like and a subscription would be the best form of thanks. Thank you. Now, get ready, as we tell the true story of how a fighter born in haste became the greatest combat aircraft of the Second World War. The story of the Mustang began not with a grand design, but with a simple business proposal and British desperation. In 1940, Great Britain, standing alone against Hitler's Germany, was in dire need of fighter aircraft. The Royal Air Force approached the American company, North American Aviation, with a request to begin licensed production of the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighter. But the head of North American, the ambitious and audacious James Dutch Kindleberger, had other plans. He despised the P-40's design, considering it obsolete. He told the British, "Why would you want to build an old airplane? Give us 120 days, and we'll build you a better machine than anything flying today." It was an incredibly bold, almost arrogant claim. 120 days to design, build a prototype, and conduct its first flight. In those days, it seemed impossible. But the British, with their backs against the wall, agreed to the risky gambit. The race against time began. North American's chief designer, the brilliant Edgar Schmude, who had once worked in Germany under Willy Mess. They worked around the clock, sleeping at their drafting tables. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They took the best existing technologies and combined them with 2 revolutionary ideas that would become the Mustang's secret weapon. The first idea was the laminar flow wing. All aircraft of that era had a conventional, convex-topped wing. It generated good lift but also significant drag, which ate up speed and fuel. Schmude, however, used a new, experimental airfoil developed by the predecessor to NASA. Imagine a wing that didn't fight the air, but sliced through it like a hot knife through butter. The airflow passed over it smoothly, creating almost no turbulence. This meant a radical reduction in drag. An aircraft with such a wing could fly faster and, most importantly, farther, using less fuel. This was the key to creating a long-range escort fighter. The second stroke of genius was the design of the cooling system's radiator. On most contemporary fighters, the radiator was a major headache, creating enormous drag that slowed the aircraft down. But Schmude and his team placed the radiator in a special scoop beneath the fuselage. They designed it so that the cold air entering the scoop was compressed and then heated as it passed through the radiator core before being expelled at high velocity from the rear of the scoop. This created the so-called Meredithy effect. The radiator didn't just avoid slowing the plane down, it actually generated additional forward thrust. The engineers had turned a disadvantage into an advantage. It was pure aerodynamic magic. And they met their deadline. 117 days after the contract was signed, the prototype, designated NA-73X, was rolled out of the hangar. It looked sleek and fast, but its heart was weak. At the US Army Air Force's insistence, it was fitted with an American Allison V1710 engine. This engine was reliable but had one critical flaw. It was not a high-altitude performer. At low and medium altitudes, the prototype demonstrated phenomenal speed, even outperforming the famous British. But as soon as it climbed above 4,000 or 5,000 meters, the British, upon receiving the first production models, which they named the Mustang Mark I, were disappointed. They found a use for it as a high-speed ground attack aircraft and reconnaissance plane, but as an air superiority fighter, it was useless. It seemed the story of this near-perfect aircraft would end before it had truly begun. An airplane with a perfect airframe and a weak heart was of no use to anyone. The US Army Air Forces showed no interest in it at all. The legend could have died in its infancy. But then the foresight of a single British test pilot, Ronnie Harker from the Rolls-Royce Company, flew the new Allison-powered Mustang and was stunned by its performance at low altitude. A brilliant idea, one that would change the course of the air war, struck him. He said, "This machine has a perfect airframe, but a lousy engine. What if we put our heart into this airframe?" The heart of a Spitfire, the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The idea took hold. In the strictest secrecy, several Mustangs in Britain were fitted with the latest high-altitude version of the Merlin engine, complete with a two-stage supercharger. It was a true heart transplant, and when the modified aircraft, now designated the P-51B, took to the skies, a miracle occurred. It was no longer the same plane. It was a completely different beast. It not only retained its speed at low altitudes, but became the undisputed king at high altitudes. The ugly duckling had transformed into a beautiful swan, no into a ruthless steel predator. The American High Command, seeing the test results, immediately realized what a weapon had fallen into their hands. The order for the P-51B and its subsequent, most produced variant, the P-51D with its bubble canopy providing all-round visibility, became an absolute priority. The North American factories worked in 3 shifts. Thousands of new, gleaming fighters began to roll off the assembly line. The bomber crews, still dying in the skies over Germany, didn't know it yet, but their savior was already flying to them across the Atlantic. The Luftwaffe's nightmare was just beginning. When the first squadrons of P-51 Mustangs arrived in England in late 1943, it was like the second coming for the American bomber crews. Until then, their escorts, consisting of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, had to leave them halfway to the target. These were good aircraft, but their thirsty engines didn't allow them to accompany the fortresses deep into the Reich. The moment the escorts turned for home was known by bomber crews as the Lonely Corner. That was precisely where the German aces were waiting for them. The Mustang changed everything. Now the bombers had little friends, as they affectionately called them, who stayed with them all the way to the target and back. The arrival of the Mustangs was a nasty and fatal surprise for the Luftwaffe. German pilots, accustomed to attacking defenseless bombers with impunity, suddenly faced an adversary that was not just their equal, but often superior to their best machines. At high altitude, the Mustang was faster than both the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Mustang 190. It could catch them in a dive and outturn them in a dogfight. And most importantly, there were so many of them. Thousands. American industry was running at full capacity, and the sky over Germany began to change color from gray to silver, the color of the unpainted Mustangs. General James Doolittle, who had taken command of the 8th Air Force, issued an order that became a death sentence for Germany's fighter force. He freed the Mustang pilots from the requirement to stick close to the bombers. Their new mission was to hunt freely. "Your primary mission," Doolittle declared, "is to destroy German fighters. Find them, chase them, and destroy them. In the air, on the ground, wherever you can find them." The systematic annihilation of the Luftwaffe began. Mustang pilots, having cleared the skies of enemy interceptors, would then descend upon German airfields, strafing planes on takeoff and landing, and burning them in their packing revetments. For German pilots it was hell. Even if they managed to survive an air battle and limp back to their airfield, death was often waiting for them there. Experienced aces were killed one after another. They were replaced by inexperienced, hastily trained youths, who became easy prey for the American hunters. By the summer of 1944, on the eve of the Normandy landings, the Luftwaffe on the Western Front had effectively ceased to exist as an organized force. The skies were completely dominated by Allied aviation, and the P-51 played a massive, decisive role in this achievement. It didn't just protect the bombers, it tore the very sky from the enemy's grasp. On D-Day and in the weeks that followed, Mustangs patrolled the skies over the beaches, preventing a single German aircraft from even approaching the landing craft. They strafed German columns rushing towards the coast, turning roads into flaming graveyards of military hardware. The Mustang proved to be an incredibly versatile machine. It was not only the perfect escort fighter but also an excellent fighter bomber. It could carry bombs, unguided rockets, and additional machine guns. It became the true workhorse of tactical aviation. But it was its qualities as a fighter that brought it fame. Its armament of 50 caliber Browning heavy machine guns was lethal. A single Willamette burst was enough to turn an enemy fighter into a fireball. The pilots adored their machine. They valued it for its speed, range, maneuverability, and, importantly, its ruggedness. The Mustang could sustain serious damage and often brought its pilot home even with a punctured engine or shredded wings. Of course, it had its flaws. The early Allison-powered models were useless at altitude. The placement of a fuselage fuel tank behind the cockpit in some variants made the aircraft unstable and prone to entering a spin. But all these problems were solved in the most advanced and mass-produced version of the Eve. It was this aircraft, with its characteristic bubble canopy, that became the symbol of victory in the air. By the end of the war, over 15,000 Mustangs of all variants had been produced. They were credited with nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft shot down in the air, and another 4,000 destroyed on the ground. It was the best record of any Allied fighter. The majority of American aces flew the Mustang. After the end of World War II, the Mustang story was not over. The jet age was dawning, but piston-engine fighters were still needed. Mustangs saw active service in the Korean War. In the early 1950s, they could no longer compete on equal terms with the latest Soviet MiG-15 jet fighters, but they proved indispensable in the ground attack role, striking ground targets and supporting the infantry. It was their swan song. They were gradually phased out of service with the U.S. Air Force, but their life continued in the air forces of many other countries around the world. Israel, Sweden, South Korea, and nations across Latin America. Dozens of countries used this reliable and effective aircraft for many years to come. Some Mustangs remained in service until the early 1980s. But even that was not the end of their story. Many decommissioned aircraft found their way into the hands of private collectors and aviation enthusiasts. They became the stars of airship. Their power and grace continue to captivate people today. And to this day, when the gleaming, polished metal silhouette of a P-51 Mustang appears in the sky, and the incomparable roar of its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine is heard, spectators freeze. And this is not just an old aeroplane, it is a living legend. It is a monument to the engineering genius that, in record time, created a weapon that changed the course of the war. It is a symbol of the courage of the thousands of pilots who fought and died in these machines for freedom. And it is a reminder of how one seemingly minor detail, the right engine and the right airframe, can be the very factor that separates crushing defeat from a great victory. The story of the P-51 Mustang is a perfect example of how, in the crucible of war, under the pressure of circumstances, and thanks to the courage of a few individuals, something is born that is not just a piece of metal but a true work of art capable of saving lives and shaping history. Your support, through likes and subscriptions, is very important to us. And don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date and never miss our new videos.